So I'm, like many of you in the room, I'm an entrepreneur, which, if we're really being honest with ourselves, just is a more socially acceptable way of saying that we work a little bit too much, right? But I have a superpower. We were talking about superpowers a lot yesterday. And my superpower is that I can sleep through nearly anything. Like, I've got a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old at home. Don't tell my wife that I can sleep through them crying. But so, you know, a few months ago, I went to bed especially late one night, and I was just exhausted, which that's usually a really fantastic combo for getting a fantastic night's rest. But this night, I was wakened in the middle of the night by my wife saying, Craig, Quinn's vomited, and there's blood in her vomit. Now that was like kryptonite to my superpower. I was like on my feet in a heartbeat, racing to the kitchen where the vomit was, and I looked at it. It was just overtaken by this wave of emotion. You know, what's going to happen to her? She means so much to me, right? Next thing I knew, I was looking at the ceiling in my bathroom, and my body had blacked out. It had said, nuh-uh, like I can't handle this emotion, you know, I just can't deal with it, it just shut down. Now, luckily, you know, that was just a scare. It was just a few drops of blood. And the worst injury of that night was the bruise on my head from falling, and the bruise to my pride, perhaps, as well. But I bring this up because the emotions of our relationships with our you know, pets and our family members just contain such rich emotional content. And you know, I think that there's a lot in our industry, like it's so prevalent, you know, that this is something that I think is an untapped resource in a lot of our marketing and in a lot of our communications. And you know, Robert has talked about it. You know, you guys, you know, this is no new news for you guys. We spent, what was it, like 2 years ago? There was a whole meeting about this. Do you remember that, Jeff? The storytelling, you know, talking about that. You know, Robert's talked about it, you know, here at this meeting. So what I really want to focus on here during my time is less about the, you know, kind of theory behind it and more about putting it into action. Like, let's take what, you know, Robert's already kind of set us up for, and like, how do we put that, you know, into action? And so I've, you know, been focusing on emotional marketing with my video production company for about 19 years now. And you know, I've kind of developed some tactics for taking, you know, topics that have rich emotional content, and how do we put that into our blog post? How do we do that, you know, in our videos, obviously for me, you know, how do we do that in social media? So I kind of wanted to walk through my process that I go through, and then, yeah, just kind of, hopefully that'll be kind of informative in how you can do that as well. So the first thing I do is I look at what's the result that I'm looking for. So what's the call to action? What's the intended goal that we're looking for? So that's where most of us kind of stop. Then we go straight to, okay, now let's solve that problem. But I would urge you, like, let's take a step back and look at what would be an emotional response that we could kind of anticipate from the audience that would help us get to that desired result. Next up would be what's already present in the topic that we're talking about that we can borrow from. So let's take content, like emotional content that's already there and present in the topic, and let's actually utilize that, you know, rather than you know, make up some emotional storyline or something. And then lastly, adapting that. So how can we take that content that's already present and adapt that for the communication method that we're looking at? So I hate acronyms, but I couldn't resist. It's REBA, because in emotional marketing, it's way better to be like Reba McEntire than Sarah McLachlan. And you know, Sarah McLachlan, you know, the commercials, we all chuckle, but they're super effective, right? Like they really trigger an emotional response in people. I would just argue that, you know, it's a really kind of a narrow emotional response that we're going after there. You know, it's sadness, it's sympathy, you know, it inflicts guilt upon us. And I would just say, like, hey, the emotional, you know, response that people can have is a really much more, it can be much more broad than that. So let's look at the opposite end of the spectrum with joy and humor. I think, when we're talking about emotional marketing, I think we can get a little bit of a bad rep in that, oh, it's always gonna be this sappy stuff. But no, humor is a really powerful, tool in communicating on an emotional level. So what I wanna do is walk through a few just examples of this, because I think, here again, I don't want to get stuck in the theory behind it. So let's look at, a veterinary practice, they're trying to attract new clients through social media. That's the result that we're looking for. The emotion that we would like to do here is trust. Robert hit on that really strong, earlier. What's already present? I have some video footage here rolling here. Like, this stuff is already present in practices every day, right? It's the compassionate staff, knowledgeable staff, happy pets coming in day to day. Knowledgeable staff, notice that I said knowledgeable and not fancy equipment. I think a lot of times we focus on the objects, and when we focus, frame that around people, that can be a different thing. So it's already rich and present. I think sometimes we overlook it, because we're so involved in the business, side of things, and we're experts in this, that we kind of overlook the emotional content that's there. But the tricky part is adapting it. So how can we take that stuff that's already there and adapt it? Now, really obvious answer here is, of course, photos. What's the trite, one photo is worth 1,000 words or 10 million or something along those lines. But I would suggest that, there's stock images that can feel really not genuine. And then there's photos that are really like homemade and can feel genuine, but they're kind of shitty. So how can we kind of split, narrow the divide there, right? So one suggestion I would have is to make the camera, so obviously I'm speaking to you guys as consultants, and some people are involved in practices, but this is stuff that can be translated into your own things as well. Photos, like, make the camera normal at the practice level. So instead of just pulling out the camera when you need it, and when you are just like, hey, we're doing a website redevelopment, like, oh, we need photos, well, then you're gonna have just what you've taken in those couple days, and your options are gonna be really limited, and people are gonna be uncomfortable because they're not used to having a camera being around. So if you make the camera normal at the practice and you're using it on a day-to-day level, then you're gonna have much more options to pick from, and people are gonna lower their guards. You're gonna have more genuine photos, and you're gonna get better, whoever's taking photos and stuff are gonna get better at it as well. Supporting a cause is another kind of side thing that would be helpful. Obviously, we care about the pets that come to us in practices, but when we're supporting causes, that can have an indirect thing. An example is my cousin Ben is a practice manager, and I've kind of watched his career and obviously followed his social media campaign. And at his practice, they do social media really well. Like, they have a staff member that's just dedicated for social media, and so they're really intentional about it. But I can't help but laugh when they do like a lost dog post. And be like, hey, we've got wind of this dog that's lost. Does anybody know who the owner is? And it'll get shared like hundreds and hundreds of times, get tons of likes and views. And I think it's why, it's great for the social kind of proof and like how that helps our social media. But I think a side benefit of that is instilling trust. Because it's, hey, if they care about this pet and they're trying to find that owner that's not a client of theirs, then they'll trust, or I can trust them with my family member as well, the one that I black out over. Staff recruitment. We've talked about this at this meeting as well. Like, how can we bring some more emotion into this topic? Result is attracting experienced, high-quality staff. The emotion, I would go for hope here. So looking at people that are coming fresh out of school, or they're coming out of maybe a job that they weren't happy with. How can we kind of give them a sense of like, hey, this is a place where you're actually gonna have some of these values that you've been looking for. This is a place where you're gonna find that. Here again, I'm having a hard time clicking. What's already present? Here again, like, the content is already there. Like, the staff that we work with, in our projects, like they're super passionate about what they do. There's a lot of fun that happens, and they're likable people. Like when we talk to them, there's a lot to borrow from there. How do we adapt it? Again, the tough part of the process. I think video interviews is a helpful tool here. So we can do interviews with staff members, and instead of asking like the really obvious questions of like, hey, tell me how great your practice is, and just being really direct with it, which you're gonna get kind of canned responses from that, right? What was that?
The beer.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah. I've always liked that, and I've always like chuckled at that, and then that's good to hear. Yeah. And I'm glad you're not listening to me and just watching the videos still. The intended purpose is working. So. Yeah, so if we do interviews with people and pulling out like less of the, hey, the obvious, tell me all about this and the information side of things, like that could be done in a flyer and in the job description and stuff like that. But more of the culture and the between the lines things, like let's pull that out. The personalities of the people that are on staff. And it might be a good idea to have somebody from the outside actually come in and ask those questions, because they're going to respond differently to that person than if like a coworker or something was going to be asking those questions. So have a staff or have a client come in and ask those questions of your staff. One more example here. Speaker consultant. Result would be engaging high-value clients through blog posts, articles, speaking engagements, that sort of thing. Emotion. I'm going to lean on trust here again. And here again, you guys here in the room are pretty cool. I like you guys, and there's a lot there that's already present, and your clients also have a lot to be, a lot of emotional content that we can borrow from. An example of this that that happened recently that I really like is Sue Ettinger. Wrote an article in today's Veterinary Business. They're a sponsor, so I have to get that name right. And I got it right? Today's Veterinary Business? Okay, good. Okay, phew. But she wrote a cover story talking about Rob Thomas. Who knows Rob Thomas? Okay. Apparently he's a musician. I give her shit about this, but she does a really great job of like leveraging, she has a famous client and she leverages that really well. But she wrote a cover story that instead of talking about like, hey, here's a bunch of tips on how to run, this is really bad because I forget what the point of the article was. But here, instead of here's like a bunch of tips, she said like, hey, let's look at Rob and what he's doing really well in his musical career, and what can we learn from him that we can adapt in our industry. And so what I liked about that is she shined the spotlight on him, and then she turns out to be the hero as a result. Okay, so obviously the adapt section there is the part that's the trickiest. So I just wanted to run through more of like a lightning round of some additional tips that can help us with that adapting, the things that are already present. How can we adapt those in a way that that works better for the mediums that we're actually doing this in? So the first three we've already talked about. This one, indirectly make your point, then directly make it. So if you're leaving little breadcrumbs, Robert did earlier with the two personas where the words were flipped around. Like I think we all figured out where he was going with that, but then we got the reward of, hey, I know what he's going to say. And then when he said it, we kind of, a few people even said it out in the crowd. I think there's like a little mental reward that happened there, and that was not planned. I'll buy you a beer or something later, Robert. Highlight your staff's activities with their own pets. So I live here in Denver. I love hiking, and my dog comes with me. Take photos, post it on social media, and you get just that little bit of emotional response out of something that happens naturally. Keep it concise but not short. You'll hear a lot, people's attention spans are so short, we need to keep things as short as possible. And while I agree that attention spans are short and we need to pay attention to that, I would argue that we should be more concerned about engagement and keeping people engaged. And emotional content does tend to take a little bit more time. So we want to be more appropriate length for the medium that we're working within. So, doing an epic novel on Facebook is probably not the best thing, but, there are, people read novels still, I think. Tease longer emotional content with shorter posts. So this is a way of kind of navigating that. If you have longer content, tease it with a social media post or something that kind of gets people hooked, and so they have the emotional buy-in to actually pay a little bit more attention to the longer content. This is an important one. Don't put too much text on one slide, else your font will be way too short. So that's why we've done another one. Share a secret. This is all about just really kind of lowering your guard and being genuine with people and letting them kind of get to know you, and it creates this sense of commonality. Front load content. So here again, with if the content is a little bit longer, have an emotional hook kind of on the front end, just to kind of get people to want to listen and pay attention a little bit more, and keep them engaged. Start relatable, then move educational. I think about this a lot with educational content, like client education and that sort of thing. If we're talking about summer heat risks, for instance, if you jump straight to heat stroke, people may be like, I'm not going to deal with that. But if you talk about, hey, when you're walking your dog in the middle of the day, the pavement's really hot, and you may not be thinking about it because you've got shoes on, but it's actually burning their feet, then that's a more relatable tip that then they may actually pay attention when you get around to the heat stroke side of things. Use humor, but don't try too hard. So my rule of thumb here is if you think it's funny and your audience doesn't think it's funny, but it feels genuine, then they'll kind of give you a pass, with that. Thank you for laughing. That felt really genuine. But if you use humor and they don't think it's funny and it feels a little forced and contrived, then I think that counts against you. So I think humor is really powerful, but let's be a little careful with it. Surprise the audience with the unexpected. So just doing this carefully. If anybody's Facebook friends with Bash, you know that he just always has these posts that are just crazy unexpected, and when you see that in the feed, it's like, oh wow, this is going to be, I don't know where this is going. This is kind of an unexpected journey. Connect content with real-life scenarios. So this is what I tried to do earlier with the 3 kind of case study examples. Instead of just jumping straight to the adapt, like the challenging piece, like let's actually frame that with story content, just to help people kind of pay a little bit more attention. And then hopefully when we got to more of the bullet point list things without the fancy videos playing in the background, hopefully you're still kind of engaged at this point. And then bookend content with emotional content. So I started with kind of a story about my relationship with my dog and just the scares and how that is. And I just kind of wanted to end with why I care about this in the first place and why I think that emotional content is really important in our industry. I was drawn to this industry because of the kind of relational dynamics that happen in practices. I really didn't think I was gonna, I did our first veterinary practice video as a favor to a friend, and it was just really surprised that, wow, this is a really emotionally rich content. The industry has a lot of emotionally rich content in it, and that's what really drew me, here in the first place. And it was a really good fit, for my skill set, with emotional marketing and that whole thing. But I see the industry changing. I think we all know that it's changing, and there's corporatization and telehealth and more technology. And I don't want to set this up as like a good and a bad thing, because I think there's tons of great things about those things. But one of the challenges in that is a lot of them promote more of a transactional encounter in our practices. And I would just urge us to really help keep this a relational industry, and I don't think that that's going to go away anytime soon, especially in the exam room. I think it's always going to be very present there. But I think we need to make sure that happens on the front end as well with our I'll circle through and say emotion like 5 more times, and then emotional marketing. But doing that on the front end with our marketing and with our communications, just to kind of help with the public persona, just so as a whole, people still continue to think of us as a relational business.